Hello and welcome to this very special interview here on Motorsport Idag Podcast. It's very interesting to have an IndyCar driver joining us for the very first time. Gabby Chaves, thank you very much for using your time to talk to us.
That's no problem. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Wow, thank you. Let's start and look into maybe this year to begin with. You have a lot of things going on, I can imagine. And what's going up for you now this year?
Yeah, I am back with IndyCar racing full time since my rookie year, which was in 2015. Since then, I've done the Indy 500, a few other races. So it's good to be back racing on a full time schedule, and I look forward to it very much to get back on track.
Yeah, I can imagine that, and it's good to see you back because I always enjoy what you do behind the wheel, and also, I think you on the American side of the pond has always sort of carried yourself a little bit different than sort of the European guys when it comes to sort of being more of the personality, sort of off the track. So it's great to see that. Was it hard to get this deal done, or was it a lot of things behind the scenes that had to be sort of done before you can sort of sit at this very point now?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a process, right? You're always putting in the work. You're always trying different angles, trying to stay relevant, trying to staying, in the eyes of the paddock, and specifically in the IndyCar paddock for me. So there was a lot of, just hanging around, being at the track, taking any opportunity you get, and and then it's just one thing leads to another. You sit down to have lunch with one guy, and he turns out to be working for this company who wants to start a racing team. And at the beginning, you're always a little bit skeptical, but you go along with it because you never know where you're going to have that next opportunity. And a few months later, you've got a contract, you have a team, and then a year later, you're back into full-time racing.
Yeah, and it has to sort of. I think that's very brave of you because at the end of the day, as you said, you don't know where it's at, but you have to take the opportunity because I understand you want to win a championship, of course, and I think you always, from what I've seen, you always try to be a sort of a strategic person. You try to do the right things at the right time, and be there when the opportunity is given. And has that been hard to sort of keep a track on the market and what's going on with teams coming and going, etc. And how's that been for you? How's it been, to get to this very point?
Yeah, it's certainly always a challenge, I mean, and any young driver in my position will relate to that, right? It's very, very hard to get to the top of motorsports. However you want to look at that, if you're looking at that, in a global aspect as Formula One, or more in the North American aspect as IndyCar, it's very hard to get there, but it's even harder to stay there. So, any young driver trying to make it, once you make it, it's not just, it's all great and now you're a professional, paid driver. It's completely different. You have to really step up your game, step up your level, and go to the next stage and show that you belong there, and show the teams that you are a guy that can win races, can win championships. So that has been a big challenge, obviously, to come in without the experience, racing against guys that have been racing in the series for a very long time in a completely different, a lot more technical, a lot more challenging car against the very best in the world, right? So it's always a challenge, but that's what we do. This is part of what we do, and the best always come out. So just you just keep on working as hard as you can to try to stay there.
Yeah. And it's very interesting to hear you say that because I've tried to keep a track on the things that you guys do. And unfortunately, the broadcasting here ain't as good as over there, so isn't as easy to keep a track on. But the road, you maybe Felix Rosenqvist as a race car driver, right? And
Yeah, of course.
he also went the way he has gone a lot of ways. But when we talk about Indy racing, and I can imagine, so the ladder to Indy, you have Indy lights. You also use the Mazda ladder as well. So going back a little bit in your racing career now, I'm trying to get this boring crap out of the way now. So you have heard this numbers of times. I get it. But for you, how was the road to Indy for you?
It was good, right? It's, I came from doing 2 years, 1 year in Asia, and then 2 years in Formula 3 and GP3 in Europe. And then I went to the Pro Mazda series. Back then it was Star Mazda. And that's kind of where I started, putting forth my effort in the road to Indy. And I did 1 year in the Mazda Championship. I finished second in the championship. Then I did 2 years in Indy Lights. I finished second my first year, and I won the championship on the second year. And then that kind of, after that, this is something that's very that separates a lot the road to Indy compared to the European Ladder Series, which is, you understand the guys that are winning championships and winning races are very, very talented and fantastic, but what do? You have sometimes champions that have nowhere to go after because there is no sponsorship, no money. I think in the road to Indy, you have a bit more of the opportunity. If you can show that you are the best and you can win the championship, you always have the next year guaranteed to have the scholarship and the sponsorship to go on to the next series. So that's always, very encouraging, like I was talking about before, for the young drivers, especially maybe in the case that you don't have family backing or you don't have sponsorships. It's very important, So that's how I was able to make it to IndyCar, was through the scholarship system. And, after that, like I said, it's a challenge. It's even more of a challenge to stay there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly why I sort of mentioned Felix Rosenqvist, because he did the Indy Lights and as well as, did a test for Chip Ganassi. And my point was, I didn't really get to that, is what I love about IndyCar and American racing is that you really try to get guys a shot at testing the real thing. So if you're sort of moving up the ladder, you always are in some ways in touch with the highest level in some ways. Whereas in Europe, I've always seen, people go through, you start with a national Formula Series, you move to F3 or GP3 and then F2. And then if you sort of do let's take Fabio Leimer as an example. He won the championship, but nobody is hearing about him. He's gone.
Yeah.
And I think for me, as a European and sort of looking at European racing, I think we are failing our talented drivers in this way, where they get the chance at F2 and then they're gone. And a lot of them are going to IndyCar and going the Indy ladder, and you see all of these talented guys, and you start thinking, what could we have done here, or what went wrong in our way of bringing up young talent?
Yeah, and I think, the IndyCar Series and the teams recognize that there is value to being able to help the young drivers, so the series rewards the teams that give the young drivers the opportunity. If you give a driver in Indy Lights, if an IndyCar team hires a driver in Indy Lights to do a test day or 2 test days, the series, then, the sanction of the series will reward the team with an extra test day for their professional drivers, right? Or half a day, or, and that's very valuable during the season for those teams that are fighting for the championship. So they will very happy, give a young driver the opportunity to drive the car, to showcase their talent, and they'll get a reward for it too. So it works both ways.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. And now I have to ask this question now. You said as you said, you raced in Europe, and you raced, of course, Indy cars. So what's the biggest difference in your mind between the sort of the philosophy around racing and the cars itself? The driving style of the F2 or F3 in regards of the Indy Lights or the IndyCar. What's the difference in the way they behave on track, etc.?
I think the biggest difference is the tracks itself. Europe, you have very smooth, very fast, and very good tracks, right? And in North America, you have more of that street course mentality and style. You have fantastic road courses too, of course, but it's not as many as you have in the calendar, as you have the street courses and the ovals. So the way you drive the car is a little bit different, because you're not really going for the most smooth, flowing driving style to get the most lap time, because the track doesn't allow you to do that. If you do that, you're going to go slow, right? Because you have bumps everywhere in the braking and the turning. It's really hard to get back to power because you're on a street course, right? You're going through the middle of downtown streets, and it's very hard to do that in a smooth way. So a lot of the time you see drivers that come over from Europe struggle a lot in their first year in the series, especially in the street courses, where you're very used to just being smooth to go fast. And it's not so much, smooth is not always the fastest way, especially in the street courses. So that I struggled with that my first year, and then you adjust. I always think that the best drivers can adjust to any circumstance, any car, any track. And anyway, they will be very fast in a few races. But I think it's the tracks that bring out the different driving styles, and more than anything.
All right, that's interesting to hear. And but for sure, I can imagine it's hard to adapt to for many drivers. If you look at, let's be fair, Scott Dixon, who is of course a great champion and great ambassador for IndyCar, but even he had his struggles when he came into the series, and it's a little bit fun to see as well. Where it's very obvious that you have to have a lot of talent and a lot of technical knowledge to be able to advance these cars with the help of your team, of course. So it's interesting to hear. And also when you see these tracks, you can really see, Sebring, you see all different tracks that you have over there. They're very bumpy. The cars really bump and move around a lot, and you have to attack them hard, and not sort of the maybe the little bit of the Formula One smoothness that we can see. You have to attack them very hard. And also hearing from a real IndyCar driver how that is, and how people can struggle with getting into that philosophy and that driving style is a bit interesting to hear. And now tell us as Europeans how the oval racing is, and is there something that you could tell us about regarding how you can sort of find extra time on oval, because that's a different type of racing?
Yeah, I think the oval racing is a lot about patience and commitment, right? And the first, patience, is because in a road course, in a street course, it's very easy. Most of the time you're never going to have a perfect car, but as a driver you can do a lot of things to compensate. You can do a lot of things in your technique to fix some understeer or some oversteer if you have the handling in the car that's not perfect. In an oval, that's not something you want to do. You don't really want to go out there and say, I'll just deal with it and I'll adjust, because first you're gonna go very slow, right? And then second, it's very high speed. It's very easy to make a mistake and crash. And when you crash, it's not just a light crash. It's probably you will need to go and get a new car. So you have to have that patience to. Something is not perfect on the car, you have to come in the pits, you make a change, you go out, you try it. If it's good, you try something else. If it's not good, then you need to make another change again, right? So there's a lot of patience in that aspect. And then the commitment also comes from that. It's so freaking fast, right? So you have to have 100% confidence in your ability, in the car, in your team. And when you get to that corner that the fastest guys are doing, flat out full throttle, you cannot second guess yourself. You have to be fully committed, and it's a fight between your brain and your right foot, right? So you're telling yourself like, I need to be flat, but then at the same time, your foot has a mind of its own. It starts lifting, so it's a constant fight, and you just have to be fully committed to the corner. And just do it when you're comfortable. So it's a little bit different, of course. Racecraft is very important in the ovals, and some other things, but mainly it's the way you approach the weekend is different.
Yeah. All right. I feel there's a million questions I would like to ask you, but oh my god, that's very interesting to hear, because it's very obvious when you really watch an oval race. For as I shouldn't say all Europeans, but a lot of Europeans that sort of are used to the racing here have a struggle to sort of get into watching oval racing. And I think when you really put the time into actually watching it, not just watch it, but actually watch it, the strategies and see, oh, that car is a bit oversteery, understeery, and how they can sort of fiddle around with small changes to get the car more planted. It becomes much more clear and much more interesting. And that brings me into the question for drivers coming from the outside. Maybe I hopefully haven't touched on it too much, but what would you say, or have you seen, that they struggle the most with when coming into the oval racing itself?
What I have seen is a lot of them, it's, just like it's still in the same mentality of a road course, right? Which is lap time and, being the fastest, right? That's very important, of course, in any discipline, any track. But in an oval, it's very easy to get caught up in a lap time. And it's not always the fastest car is the best race car. And having a good race car is more important than having the fastest race car in an oval. Because you can do one lap very fast, and guess what? You still have to do 50 laps on this set of tires before you come in to change tires, right? So that if you don't have a good balance for 50 laps, it can be a very, very long day in a race. And I've been there. I've made the mistake. You focus so much on just having the fastest car and the fastest lap that you forget about putting a good race car for the race. So I've seen a lot of the guys that, they just say less downforce, more speed on the straightaway, make the car more free, so it's less scrubbing in the corners. And yeah, it's fantastic. They have a great qualifying. And then you go to the race and, within the first 40 laps of a 300-lap race, they're already 1 or 2 laps down. So it's just a different mental approach to it. It's a lot more of a engineering playground than a driver playground.
Okay. That's a great answer. I finally got it now. That's for sure. You're pro at this, man. Are you sure you should be a driver? Not an instructor, man. That's really good. Now that's cool. And I just love it, man. He's such a nice person and so great at answering the questions. Anybody that would have answers and that would like answers to this would just ask you, man. We get great answers, man. So, man, you have a great career after your racing career. And that sort of brings me to the question regarding opinions. Looking at Fernando Alonso, of course, raced last year at the Indy 500. Opinions about his effort at the I would say the Great American Race.
You have to look at it in a very unbiased way, right? He's probably one of the best drivers of this era, right? So there's that, and he's also coming into that race at the Indy 500 with probably the most successful team in the last 10 years in that race, where he probably had one of the best cars, and he's probably one of the best drivers of all time, especially in the past 15 years or so. So that to me is like, there was no doubt in my mind that he was going to be a contender for the race. And I'm not saying he would have won or wouldn't have won. Obviously, there was technical difficulties with his car during the race, but it's just, to me, that wasn't even a doubt. I never had a doubt that, he's going to struggle. He's not. He's Fernando Alonso, right? He's one of the best guys, best drivers ever, and paired with the best team that you can ever ask for, in the recent years for that race. So yeah. It was a recipe for success.
Yeah, well, for sure. But I think for you as a IndyCar driver being in that series, as you said, now full time, and people coming from the outside, you had Kurt Busch for just a few years ago, was 2014, something like that, when he also drove in the Indy 500, something like that, I think. You have Jack Villeneuve, you have had all of these outsiders, so to speak, and it's interesting to see how you guys that are sort of native to the series, how you sort of look at it in that way. And also, before we get into the sort of the cars for this year, which are freaking beautiful, just saying, man, there's so many things I would ask, man. But looking at this season and what you think the team that you're with, what do you actually think is achievable looking at this season?
Well, first I agree. I agree that the cars are fantastic for this year. You know, the new body kit is really unbelievable. It looks great. It performs really good too. And then obviously coming in the season with a brand new team, first year that we put together the team for a full-time season. We did 3 races last year, had some good success. It's a bit of unknown. You know, we don't really know. We know that we have our short-term and long-term goals. You know, the long-term goals I think will stay, which is, you know, we want to be winning races, we want to be on the podium, and we want to be a challenge for the Indy 500 and for the championship. Now, I don't know if that can realistically happen in the first year or not, or the second year. So that's when our short-term goals come in, you know, and we'll start the season. We'll make sure that we are making progressive improvements every race weekend. Depending on that, we will adjust our goals. But I would say if this season we can have some top 10, some top 5s, maybe a podium here and there, I would say that would be a very successful first year for the team.
I totally agree. Looking at the questions that you get asked regarding the sport that is IndyCar, from outsiders and native to the sport, what are the most common asked questions that you receive regarding the cars and the sport?
I would say there is always a lot of talk about, you know, how it compares to like Formula One, right? There's always that comparison going on because some of the people that don't follow IndyCar specifically have heard of Formula One or vice versa, right? So there is always a good comparison with that. Of course, there is always the question of, you know, what is the top speed, how much power you have, you know, all the good questions that you're used to. But, you know, I think at the end of the day, the answer is it's about the racing and it's about the fans. And, you know, we can try to make the cars look as good as they can, but we need to have a really good on-track show. And I think that's where IndyCar stands out, is the on-track performance between the drivers and the competition is unmatched by any other series in the world.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, and it's great to hear that because there are similarities, and of course there are differences between Formula One and IndyCar, which is pretty obvious. But it's nice to still hear them. For me, I definitely think that V8 Supercar, IndyCar, and MotoGP, excitement-wise, are the best series on this planet. If as a newcomer and new to motorsports, I think definitely these three would be a springboard into watching motor racing. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You know, I love MotoGP. I haven't watched a lot of V8 Supercar races, but I have watched them before, and I totally agree. You know, as far as the excitement and show for the fans and for the competition on track with the drivers, it's, you know, there is nothing else like it right now.
Yeah, and they're not predictable. I'm sorry. I love Formula One, but man, I don't know. I don't want to know 5 laps into the race who's gonna win. I'm sorry. I'm gonna get burned for this. But listen, this is not on you. I take the heat. So if I'm not calling in about 10 days, you know what happened to me. So, like, no, but it's fair though, and I think that's what's so great about the American philosophy, that they want parity. They want as many manufacturers or teams to be able to win races. That's just fair. That's the American philosophy, and that makes it possible for teams like your team to come into IndyCar and sort of, I shouldn't say maybe make a huge profit, but let's say they sort of can still have a functioning organization within the sport. Get me right. Whereas if you look at Formula One, you had Virgin in 2010, you have Team Lotus, you had Manor, etc., etc. And you know, although you have to be performed, but look at the teams like Ferrari that can spend 300 million excess Look how much money they spent on Schumacher, just on Schumacher alone, and not counting in Rubens Barrichello. And you look at Mercedes, and I love the sport of Formula One, but they need to sort of understand that if the sport itself is going to survive with the huge costs, they have to change their philosophy. So that brings us into the differences between Formula One and IndyCar. To begin with, you have tested, I shall say, the Areoscreen or a shield or whatever you want to say, and we are stuck with the Halo for 2018. And I don't know if you have sort of simulated the Areoscreen, but what has been the opinions regarding it?
Yeah, I did a lot of the initial work as far as simulators, right? So we did the first prototype, we put it on the simulator, and then we did a few iterations of it, right, as it progressed, and with the feedback that I gave them. Obviously, the first prototype we used, there was some vision distortion that needed to be fixed. So we came back with a second and a third iteration that completely fixed that, at least on the simulator. And this was over the span of a year and some months, right? So it wasn't like it was a brand new idea and then we did this in 2 weeks. No, I mean it's a long process and a project that has been going on for a while. But I think from the beginning we were committed to the idea that the Aeroscreen would be the most viable option for IndyCar racing, because we race on ovals, and on the ovals, when you're in a banking, the horizon is changing and you have to be able to have the whole view of the whole track, and if you have some system like the Halo where you have the bars crossing here and here, when you're looking at at an angle straight the horizon, you might have some of your view blocked. So that wasn't really an option for us. And we knew that aesthetics are very important to our fans. And although that safety is our number one priority, we want to do what we can to make sure that the fans are still being pleased with what we can innovate and what we come up as a solution. Mm-hmm. So after that was the time to put the first prototype, on track and test it. And that's what we did last week. And Scott Dixon was the first driver to try it on track. And from what I understand, it was a very successful test.
Okay, well, that's a very sort of reoccurring topic regarding racing, and I think for me, it's interesting to discuss. But what do you think about sort of the differences and the similarities of Formula One? As an IndyCar driver, of course, I understand you wanna be on that side, and I think, as an IndyCar driver, what do you think Formula One should learn from IndyCar, basically?
It's hard to say. I really think that Formula One is no doubt the king, right? That there is no doubt about it, but just because it is known as being the top of the top doesn't mean that it is the best racing, right? And I think that the fans that really enjoy Formula One would really enjoy even more, and it would bring a lot more new fans into Formula One if they can put on a better show on track, because some of the tracks, and I will agree with you, it's not so fun to watch the start of the race, and within 2 or 3 laps, you already know what the finishing position is going to be for most of the running order. And the only excitement that happens in track, is in the pits. So that's, that to me is in racing. That's just a show of who has the best technology and who can spend the most money. Yeah. Right. And you will see it in qualifying and you will see it in the race. But that's not racing, in its most pure form, right? And I think that's where IndyCar, although the budgets are much, much lower compared to Formula One, and the technology is not on the same level, you have the racing. And I think this is very good, because no matter what, any racing fan is going to enjoy watching IndyCar racing. You can be you don't have to be an open wheel fan to enjoy IndyCar racing, because it's just fantastic racing on track. So I think that's, a little bit of what each could use from each other, right?
Yeah. All right. And this, I really have to ask this, because I think I'm one of the first podcasts in the country that has really have an IndyCar driver. So who better to ask about the very controversial comments from Günther Steiner of Haas? And let's just give your opinion. Do you think IndyCar drivers are talented enough to race in Formula One? Simple.
Of course I do. Of course I do. I think, when you're at such a high level, the best drivers in most series, in any series that is regarded as a very high level series, if you're in the right car and the right team, I think you can do very well. And of course I will say a Scott Dixon, Joseph Newgarden, any of those guys in the current IndyCar series that are considered as the top drivers right now, will have absolutely no problem challenging for race wins and championships in the right car and the right team, of course, in Formula One.
Yeah. And this is something I've discussed with my fellow friend Roger Hamburg, which is a friend of mine, and we do the Formula One podcast together. And this is some very interesting topic. Why don't sort of the Formula One teams scout some talent from the Indy Lights, IndyCar side of the pond? Because I understand this. If you go the Indy ladder, you want to go to IndyCar, and that's fine. But I mean, like when it comes to if you only sort of focus on the talent itself, because you just said it, you had Scott Dixon, which is he's shown it's a 4-time. And you have Newgarden, first year with Penske, is a champion, etc., etc. And we have Gabby Chaves, and so no, but I mean, like, why realistically couldn't they look at IndyCar for talent to race?
They very well could, right? They very well could, but it comes back to, I think one of the first conversations we had, which was the mentality in which you are approaching the different tracks, right? So for them, I think it's a lot easier to be looking, in the same continent, and they can see the drivers who are performing in that style of European track. So of course, if you are to look at someone in Indy Lights or IndyCar, there might be a few races of a transition period, right? And as far as I can tell, maybe the mentality and the philosophy is that we just want to go with what we think will work, because that's what we've always done, and it's not really open to change, right? So it's just what they know has worked and what they have been doing for years and years. So why change something that has been working for them, right? No. But not that I say it wouldn't work if you go look at Indy Lights or IndyCar, because it has in the past, right? I mean, I will take, for example, like Juan Pablo Montoya, right? Champion in IndyCar and goes to Formula One, is one of the best drivers, goes back to IndyCar, is always one of the best drivers, right? So to me, a good driver, I should say the greatest and the best drivers will be at the top of any series they compete in with the right team and the right car.
All right. And I actually totally agree. But for me, I always wondered why, because there's nothing wrong with IndyCar drivers as drivers. You see even Jorge Lorenzo is a MotoGP champion, who tested a Mercedes F1 car and also was very quick. So I mean, like, for a series that is remotely alike when it comes to partially the way it races, sort of, let's take sort of street courses now, I think they can look at least at IndyCar drivers and consider them as very talented drivers. But of course, I understand your point on it. But okay, let's just cut to the chase. I want you to be in the Formula One, dude. Come on. But it's cool. But I like that. And it's interesting. And sort of to round out this interview, I think we should touch on just a little bit about your opinions on maybe the DRS, and what you think about the racing of this year, and if you're going to rejoin Race of Champions in the future.
Yeah, I mean, first, I would love to rejoin Race of Champions, when the opportunity is correct. Obviously, it was very fun last year racing in the Race of Nations with Montoya, and we had a good time. We went to the semifinals, so that was a great time. And going back to the systems that you use for like overtaking and making a bit better racing, like the DRS, or in IndyCar we have the overtake, the push to pass. It's just I think it's just a matter of what works for each series, right? I think the biggest difference between the two systems is that in IndyCar, you can use the overtake whenever you want to try to catch up or to try to defend. And it's always good racing, even if you're not using it. And it leaves it for strategy, right? Do you go at and use it right away and maybe you make some positions, or maybe you run out at the end of the race and there's a caution and now you're a sitting duck on the start, right? So it's a bit more a strategy. And I think, like, in comparison to the DRS, you just use it whenever you're allowed, right? So just a little bit different. I think both have advantages and disadvantages to their specific series. And, ultimately, I believe in what IndyCar is doing, which is we are trying to improve the racing by itself without the help of, systems like this. And like how we did this year, we tried to increase the downforce, or I should say the ground effect of the car, to have more grip from the bottom of the car and reduce the downforce, the topside grip of the car, so that we can have better racing on track and the cars can follow closer to each other without suffering, from turbulence and aero disturbances. So I think that is good mentality. We're trying to make it better for the fans.
Yeah, and I think that's the right sort of thing to work towards. You see now when Formula One has American owners, you see what happened. You saw it at Austin, Texas, and you saw London Live. These things when they sort of try to improve it for the fans, and I think that's always been American philosophy, is that the fan or the consumer, let's say, is at the very sort of peak of the importance of the companies, and I think that's the right thing to focus on. All right, Gabby, I just want to ask you to just stay a short while after this interview, and me from Sweden and Motorsport Idag Podcast want to say thank you for joining us this afternoon, as it is here in Sweden.
Anytime, guys. Thank you for having me. It was fun chatting with you, so I enjoyed it too.